Hello and welcome to the Rooted Together podcast, the podcast which aims to root you in Christ through his word together. I'm your host, Charles, and today we are in Genesis chapter 33, and we are continuing this Jacob and Esau saga. Last time we left Jacob with a hurt hip, limping to go meet his brother after spending a lot of time conniving ways to appease him by giving gifts and strategically locating different parts of his family. And now we see that Jacob is going to meet Esau, and there's a lot of tension going into this meeting because what's going to happen? Will Jacob appease Esau, or will Esau already be ready to see Jacob, or will Esau try to kill Jacob? We'll find out. But the main idea of our chapter is this, that it is God who transforms hearts and resolves conflicts for those who submit to him. And this is demonstrated in Esau's attitude change toward Jacob, even while Jacob has been brought into submission through his wrestling encounter in the last chapter. And we don't know what Esau has been dealing with, but he's changed. The last time we met Esau, he was ready to kill his brother, and that's why Jacob had to flee. And when we meet him again, it's a very different Esau. Now, of course, decades have passed, and yet we kind of see the same Jacob. He's still conniving. He's still trying to scheme his way into appeasement. He's still trying to use that self-reliance, but he's just had this encounter with God, and it was a wrestling match that ended up with him limping perhaps for the rest of his life. And that's how God dealt with Jacob, because Jacob's stubborn. We don't know how God dealt with Esau, but we see that behind the scenes, that's what's been happening. Esau's attitude has changed because God transforms hearts and he resolves conflicts for those who submit to him. Sometimes that is a long time of just self-reflection, and sometimes that involves a wrestling match with God where you get injured. Right? Sometimes that process can be painful, and sometimes it can just be reflective. And we'll get into that a little bit here. Now, the first part we want to look at is that Jacob's fear was transformed by grace. Jacob's fear of his brother was lingering for all those decades, especially, perhaps even uniquely, when God told Jacob, return home to your father's land. And that certainly invoked the sense of fear, because he knew the last time I heard, Esau wanted me dead. And so there was fear. And we understand that fear lingered. He didn't think after decades, it's all good now. He knew that he had wronged his brother. And again, self-reliance has consequences, and it was a broken relationship between brothers. But yet, after this wrestling match, he moves forward to meet Esau, and he does it alone. Now, he sends his people in front. He still invokes his plan of gifts, right? That's already done. But when Jacob meets Esau, it isn't an angry man, but it's his brother who loves him. What we don't see, that we learn, is that God had been dealing with Esau's heart behind the scenes, changing his attitude toward Jacob. And this is a shift that no matter what preparations Jacob made, no matter what appeasements he offered, they didn't do that. Jacob's gifts didn't do the work that we see in chapter 33. That was God. God did that. He transformed Esau's heart. We look in verse 1. It says, now Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming toward him with 400 men, and he thought for that second and said, oh no, that's 400 men, that's an army. So he divided quickly his children among Leah, Rachel, and the two slave women, and he's dividing them out, going, if he attacks, we have a chance. This is his self-reliance and scheming already, again, after his wrestling match, because he's worried that Esau is coming to kill him. But verse 4 happens. But Esau ran to meet him. He leaves his 400 men behind, and he runs to meet his brother, hugged him, threw his arms around him, kissed him, and then they wept. They both wept. I don't think Jacob saw that coming. He sees the 400 men. He quickly begins dividing, and Esau, perhaps even seeing that, going, oh, he's scared, runs ahead of his men and embraces his brother. It's the first time they've met since Jacob had tricked him, the first time they had met since Esau had said, I want to kill Jacob. And they hug and they weep together. When Esau looked up and saw the women and children, he asked, who are these with you? I mean, he hadn't seen Jacob. When Jacob left, he was a single man. And now he has all these family and all these possessions. And he answered, the children God graciously gave your servant. And notice how he refers to himself as your servant. He's this humility. And then he continues on. And so Esau in verse 8 says, what do you mean by this whole procession that I met? I saw all these things you sent my way. What's going on with this? And Jacob's honest here. I was trying to find favor with you. In verse 9, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have. Esau's like, God's blessed me too. I have plenty of possessions. I don't need your possessions. That isn't what has changed my mind. And this is what I mean. Behind the scenes, God has been working on Esau's heart. And so when the two brothers meet, it wasn't the gifts that Jacob gave. It wasn't the scheming that Jacob had that won and changed Esau's heart. Oh no, far from it. It was God who was transforming Esau's heart behind the scenes. Now, our second point here is that God's invisible work behind the scenes, which is what we just highlighted. You see, all of Jacob's preparations in verse 8, Esau says, they're useless. I don't need those. I love you because you're my brother. God had been working on his heart. He didn't even want these gifts. So we see first that God had transformed Jacob's fear into grace by saying, your fear is not warranted. Your brother runs to meet you. There's weeping. There's love between the brothers. In verse 8, we see that God's invisible work was behind the scenes all those decades while Jacob was away. All of his preparations and all of his self-reliance and scheming did nothing because Esau's like, I don't need your stuff. I just wanted you. I just wanted my brother back. The reconciliation they experienced wasn't secured by Jacob's scheming, but through God's sovereign intervention, working simultaneously in both brothers' hearts from apart. Miles apart, God was working in the scenes. Our third point here is that submission to God opens up a pathway to blessing. And we see that as the chapter continues here. As the two brothers talk it out, Esau said, let me leave some of my people with you because I want to meet you at H.E.A.R, and I want you to come with me. And he says, so I want to leave some people. I don't think Jacob wants that because he's still, even after all this, is still thinking, what if this is all a ploy to get me? Verse 16, that day Esau started on his way back to H.E.A.R after them having this conversation. Hey, you come. Basically, Esau says, come live with me. I have plenty of space for all your people, all your things. Come live with me. And so he's like, let me leave some people with you because Jacob said we're tired, our people are exhausted, and so Esau's like, hey, I can protect you. I can use some of my soldiers, and they can watch over you. But Jacob's like, hey, in verse 15 he goes, wow, why do that? Please indulge me. Just let me do my own thing. Jacob's still scared. And that day in verse 16 it says, that day Esau started on his way back to Seir, but Jacob went to Succoth. And he built a house for himself and shelters for his livestock, and that is why the place was called Succoth. After Jacob came to Paddan Aram, he arrived safely at Shechem in the land of Canaan and camped in front of the city. He purchased a section of field where he pitched his tent from the sons of Amor. That's going to come in play later. And he just settles down. And he set up an altar there, and he called it God, the God of Israel. For us, will we trust that God will resolve our conflicts if we lay our hearts upon him? And it may take decades, but we have to trust that if God wills it to be, that he will transform the hearts of the people. And behind the scenes, we might not see it. We don't know what God is doing in someone's life. And know that your self-reliance and your scheming aren't going to be what appeases people. It's not going to be what restores a relationship. Only God's hand can do that. So put it in the Father's hand today. Thank you for joining me in Rooted Together. I look forward to joining you in chapter 34 next time. I'll see you there.